Now, with all that about money and digital money and mobile money as a basis, there was a conversation going on across the internet starting way back in the 1980s, through the 1990s and into the early 2000s on how it would be possible to create a natural currency, a natural version of cash for the digital economy of the 21st century. And the key word in there is cash. Because when you accept cash, when you're running a business and someone is handing you cash, the only trust you have to have is trust that this piece of paper has value, right? You trust it's not a counterfeit, and you trust that the government that issued that paper money will still consider it money tomorrow. And that sounds like it's a crazy thing to have to do, except you can go off and look at India a year or two ago that just turned around and said, well, this one note, our biggest note, is no longer valid. So these things do happen. But what you don't have to do when you're accepting cash is you don't have to trust a bank. You don't have to trust a payment system. You don't trust PayPal or M-Pesa or anyone else. All you have to do is trust this piece of paper. So the question, again, that they were trying to answer is, how do you create an online money system that feels and acts like cash, where there's three most important aspects about cash versus everything else we already talked about? One, it's decentralized. No one's in charge. Two, it's anonymous. We don't know if you made the purchase or not. And third, the system's trustworthy, but you don't have to trust everyone in it. So let's dive into those three topics. So this first bullet point, decentralized, is one of the most important and one of the hardest to do. So what we mean by decentralized, not that there was no one printing the money. In the case of paper money, there's the Federal Reserve in the US and the European Central Bank and so forth printing the pieces of paper. But the system as a whole, the cash-based system of payments, once the piece of paper exists, once the piece of paper is out in the world being transferred from person to person, no one's in charge. There's no banks to trust. There's no PayPal to trust. There's no M-Pesa to trust. Passing around the paper money is totally decentralized. No one is in charge. All right, so the system operates just fine. It operates reliably, right? Every day you can transfer money around. It can grow. The economy can double in size and the system still works. The amount of money, this is one that's not always true historically, is that the amount of paper money in cash system should match the needs, that their supply should meet demand. Sometimes that broke down in historic times. It hasn't happened anywhere in the last 100 years in the US. There's always enough paper money around. So how do you build an online system that meets all of those goals, right? That seems like an impossible set of goals, except we have a bunch of examples of systems that are online that do this. In fact, this is how email works. There is no one company in charge of email. There's an open standard on how email is sent from computer to computer, and whoever you're using as your email provider uses that same protocol to talk to whoever is receiving the email. Same thing's true of the World Wide Web. There is no one in charge of the World Wide Web. Anyone who wants to create a website can do that. No one can say no. They can put up whatever they want. They can link to whichever other sites they want. And that connection, those links, is what makes the web powerful and useful. And in fact, this is true for the entire internet. There is no internet company. There is no internet consortium. If you want to be part of the internet, you can buy some equipment and connect yourself up to another node on the internet, and your packets will flow from source to destination and back, and no one's in charge. So there was proof for these techies that this was possible, but no one could figure out how to do it for money. Now, the second thing these creators were trying to dream up was how to copy the anonymity of cash. So just think of it. When you go into a store and you pay with cash, you'll get a receipt, but they don't know who you are. And if you're accepting cash as a business, you don't know who your customers are. So all the transactions are completely anonymous. There's no database of who has how much cash in their pocket. There's no system out there and no potential system out there to track where the cash is, who has the cash, and what they're doing with it. And that lack of traceability is not just for banks and credit card processors and other financial institutions. It goes all the way up to the government. The government issues the cash, but then they don't know who has it. And so if you go read the techno-libertarian mantras and manifestos, you'll see this totally fits in with that. And you'll see the word libertarian pop up a lot around Bitcoin. And thirdly, what's really interesting is that if you look at the web or you look at the internet, especially the internet, you trust that the internet works. You trust that when your computer throws its packets out into the internet, that they'll get where they're going to exactly the right place where you sent them. And you'll get the answers back from those sources. But you don't actually have to trust any of the computers between here and there. That your packets are going to hop from computer to computer, totally outside your control. You may even not trust the companies that are running those computers in between here and there and back again. But you trust the system as a whole. Trust emerges from the system despite the fact you don't have to trust everyone in the system. For example, if I go to Citibank.com, right, on the web, I trust that I've gotten to the website that's run by the Citibank bank, the Citibank company. Right? I trust that I haven't been sent off to a hacker site that looks like Citibank. Right? As long as I've typed in Citibank.com, I trust I will get there. And that trust is real. And we're not going to talk about how that's real, but it is. I also trust that because it's an encrypted connection, no one except Citibank can actually see anything in that conversation I'm having with Citibank. They can't see my bank balance. They can't see what transactions I'm doing. It's completely anonymous to anyone listening in. And even though my packets are flowing through Verizon and Comcast and AT&T and Cisco and a whole bunch of other companies that I specifically do not trust, I trust that this conversation can go on between me and Citibank just fine, and me and Google, and me and Apple, and me and Fidelity, and me and everyone else out there. That's the emergent property. And that's really hard to do in general. So that conversation that started in the 80s and continued in the 90s and into the early 2000s, all that boiled down to the one big question of how do you stop double spending? So the conversation went like this. Assume we could create electronic cash. Assume we had a method for doing that. How do we stop person A from sending one of these pieces of digital cash to person B, and then at the very same time sending the same exact piece of digital cash to person C? And so without a central bank, without a central PayPal system or Visa system or someone else, A would tell the world, hey, I sent this coin to B. And they would at the same time said, hey, I sent the coin to C. And now who has the coin? Does B have the coin or C have the coin? Well, is it the first person to put up their hand and go, oh, I got A's coin? That's not good for the other person. You have to realize the internet is global. There actually is no such thing as the same time. It takes time for the packets to flow around the internet. So if A shot out this message to the world saying I sent the coin to B, and then immediately turned around and said I sent it to C, those two packets could not have been sent at the same time, but they may have been received in either order, right? If I'm sitting on the other side of the world, I might have gotten the message I sent the coin to C first before I got the message I sent the coin to B, and someone else might have seen it in the other order, the order it was sent. And so how do we trust that A hasn't done this? So no one organization can be the judge. No one organization can say, A, you spent that money twice, I'm going to throw you in jail for that. And no one could even say whether or not the coin is in B or C's hand. So if you can't do that, well, then you can't trust any of these coins, right? Because every single one of these coins could simply be a duplicate. And that was the big unsolved problem. No one had an answer until Satoshi Nakamoto. We don't even know if that's a real person. Until someone with the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto posted a white paper in 2008 entitled Bitcoin. This was the seminal paper. This was the big breakthrough. And in the next video, I'll explain to you how it works.